What is a DAW? Nothing but a miserable pile of time sink. But enough talk. Have at you! What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Before we get started on today's topic, I just wanted to give everybody a huge thanks for helping me reach 5K. In order to celebrate, on my Discord, I am offering a remix jam where you can download some of my stems and submit a remix. The deadline is October 3rd, and then October 4th on my birthday we will be having a reaction stream. It's nothing big, it's not for a prize or anything, it's just something I thought would be fun for all of you guys, and plus it gives you a little bit of insight to my own personal production if you don't catch my streams. One thing I want you all to be mindful of though is that, as a disclaimer, you can use these stems to remix things or to remix my song, but you cannot use it for your own music. Don't be that person. So with all that out of the way, my name is Alckemy, and if this is your first time to the channel, I would love to give you a warm welcome. Up in the middle of the screen, there is a link to my website that has a bunch of products both available for purchase and free download, and it's just a way that you can support the channel if you want. Another way that you can support the channel is just by interacting with this video and my YouTube channel in general, whether it be a like, subscription, or if you want extra content or extra goodies, then you can consider a membership. In general, within a workstation, there's a lot of different things that you're not even gonna know if you like it or you don't like it until you get a feel for all of the programs and you have like X amount of expertise. And I can't really tell you what that threshold is or how much time it's going to take, but there is just this certain point of fluency that you're going to have to develop that's a kind of a big struggle for you guys, for brand new producers. These are questions and these are things that I didn't even know about or had no idea what I was getting myself into whenever I first started learning about music production in general, which was in 2013. Like, I didn't know anything about anything. My first DAW was Machine, and I spent like 20 minutes just trying to figure out how to pull up a kick. And there were so many assumptions that I had, thinking that this thing was going to magically do what I wanted it to in order to create music or whatever, and I was quickly swept off my feet and landed right on my butt and started realizing that all the things that I want, or all the music and sounds that I wanted to make, are going to have to come from the ground up. There is a lot more luxury these days in 2020, and there are certain features within these programs now, and I have to say that technology has come a long way, but hopefully by the end of this video, this will help you stay a little bit more informed with everything that we're going to be going through. This is most likely going to be turning into a super lengthy video, so for all of you guys, grab yourself some coffee or take breaks between the video and you try to bear with me, okay? Because there's going to be a lot of dry information, but I do believe that this will be some good stuff in order to help you consider, you know, where you're going to put your hard-earned money. Today's topic is how to choose the right DAW for you. In other words, it is a survival guide on how to pick the right DAW. I've got a bunch of questions that you want to ask yourself, and I also have some questions that you don't want to ask yourself. And without further ado, let's talk about the ones to avoid first. The questions to avoid is, what artists use this DAW? Don't do that, because you never know what their process is going to be, and you also don't know whether or not your process is going to match theirs. You know, just because Flying Lotus uses Machine doesn't mean that I'm magically going to be able to make music like Flying Lotus. The second question is, can I make X music / professional music with this program? The answer most likely is yes. Yes, you can. Simply. Doesn't matter what you use. Most DAWs these days are pretty fluid in what they can produce. It's really just about how well you know how to make music, so don't worry about whether or not you're making the right decision in that department. Third question, can this DAW make X sound? I think that whenever I first bought Machine, I was under the assumption that I was going to find a preset of a particular sound and immediately start using it. And I really want to try to turn you all off from this idea, because most likely whatever you hear in your head isn't going to be readily available. You might hear a few, or you might catch a few, and there might be some cool presets or whatever, but if you know nothing about sound design, you got a lot of watching to do on my channel, for one, but two, it's not going to be readily available for you, because even if it is in there, the only way that you're going to find out is just by doing a ton of digging, because you're not going to know what the terminology is. You're not going to know the language of these kinds of things. So the last question that I would want to try to avoid is like, what is the best DAW? What is the best DAW for X kind of music, XYZ? There is no best DAW. It all comes down to you. As you gain experience over things, and as you kind of look through this flowchart and ask yourself the right questions whenever we do this stuff, I think that you're going to start to find a kind of feel or like a different approach to how you want to make music. There are so many ways to make music. Some people want to be more tactile with things, where they want to play instruments and record. Some people want to do everything on a mouse and keyboard. Some people just want to throw everything together and push play and hope it works. There are different programs or different workflows that cater to all those things, and it's going to be kind of up to you to figure out what those are. So before we get into the questions that you do want to ask yourself, I'm going to give you a little bit of advice, and this is just going to be some things that are going to help you gain some experience without any penalty, meaning how to get some experience without costing any money, or delving too many resources, or asking your buddy to, give you a copy of something, right? So the main thing that you want to do is, if you can, demo everything. And this doesn't even have to be with digital audio workstations. It can also be with plugins. It could be with any piece of software that you're considering purchasing. Demo everything. Try to understand and try to look at everything that the program has to offer, and see how well you can do with navigating, with figuring out where you are, with figuring out whether or not if you can even get the thing to make noise or not, right? And the only way that you're going to know if something works for you is by getting yourself a little bit of experience with it. Now, I know that's a lot of downloading, and that's a lot of program surfing and all this stuff, but keep in mind, it's a lot of money. Don't take someone else's word of yo, FL is the dopest for making trap or whatever. While a lot of people make trap, that doesn't mean that's going to be the best way that you make trap. So try to give yourself a little bit of experience, so that way you can kind of see where the familiarities and where the differences lie in the first place, because otherwise you're gonna have no idea. The second thing is familiarizing yourself with the list of DAWs and features in the first place, and I'm gonna help you out with that today. It's gonna be a little bit brief on the explanations of these DAWs and stuff, and I'm probably not gonna cover all of them, but just so that you're aware and you have a place to look, I'll kind of bring up some of these in the first place. So the first one that I want to talk about is Ableton Live. It's really awesome. It can do just about everything that you want it to do. It really caters towards a lot of live performance stuff. So it has something called Session View, where you can launch clips. It has a lot of sound design stuff that you can get into as well, and it's very easy to load up a sample or load up an instrument and just let it play. There's Cubase, which is pretty much only for wizards. No, I'm just kidding. Cubase has been around forever, and it's a super professional program where a lot of live recording people use that kind of stuff. I don't really know what its standout features are, but it's very difficult to learn, in my opinion. Not that I want to turn you off from it, but that's just kind of the experience that I've had with that. FL Studio. FL Gang, that's what a lot of people do. In my opinion, FL Studio has the best first-party plugins. It also has a really awesome MIDI editor for making or coming up with new chords, melodies, all that stuff. And I think that it's definitely worth your time if you enjoy working in that environment. It can also make videos and stuff for you, which is really cool. Next up, we have Reason, which is also a super classic. It kind of took a long time, but it has a very modular approach. So if you've ever had any experience with working with hardware of connecting cables and all that stuff, then you're going to feel kind of at home for that. It's not the only features that it offers, but that's its biggest standpoint. Bitwig Studio. This is kind of like Ableton 2.0 in some ways. It takes a lot of ideas from Ableton and is very inspired in that way and tries to improve on some of them. It's also behind on some of them, but the big thing with this is that it has a very modular environment in the digital era, meaning that there are all these modulators that you can basically assign to anything to just create super crazy randomness. So you can kind of look into that on the website and all that stuff, but Bitwig has been very, very good to me as I am almost a year in with it. Next up, we have Pro Tools, which is kind of like the king of live recording. It is very difficult to do a lot of simple things in that, but I mean, obviously it's been a standard for so long. There's Reaper. Reaper is super cheap, and it's also the standard for video game incorporation. It can run certain things of code, I think it's called Python. Feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of integration with programs and stuff that you can do within that. There is Cakewalk, which I believe is free. I don't really know much about Cakewalk, but it's definitely accessible. There's Logic, which is kind of Apple's own program. It can do a lot of different things and is relatively easy to use and has a pretty clean interface, although I can't really think of anything that makes it stand out as oh, this is why you use Logic. Same thing with President Studio, like Studio One. These are kind of all these transparent DAWs that I don't really or haven't really spent a whole lot of time with. There are the free ones. Of course, if you have a Mac, there's GarageBand, there is Audacity, which is free, but those aren't nearly as feature rich, and those might be perfect for helping you figure out how to make music in general. And there's also some other free DAWs that you can look into as well, but I just wanted to cover some of the main ones with all this stuff because these are the most typical ones that you will see if you're looking for tutorials on YouTube. Which comes into my next piece of advice. If you're interested in a particular DAW or you're starting to feel kind of swayed towards one or the other, one thing that what you really need to do is watch as many YouTube videos as you possibly can on them. Anything and everything. How to make music on Ableton, how to work with audio in Bitwig, how to, you know, write chords in FL Studio, all that stuff. And this can be applied. I kind of feel like the more knowledge base you have, like let's say like YouTube, because let's be honest, if you're watching this video, then you know that YouTube is a huge catalyst for watching videos and gaining information, right? So I would argue that the largest amount of like video information that you have access to would most likely increase your chances of like how well you can inform yourself on a program without actually having to buy it, right? Because there's all the stuff that you want to know. I have a whole series on Bitwig that, as much information as there is, it still doesn't cover everything, but on a rudimentary sense, you can pretty much learn all the basics within that playlist, and I will leave a link to that somewhere down there. But you really just want to try to be informed and figure out other people's approaches, right? Because not everybody, especially like your favorite artists, are that open to being like, hey, I like this program. Are you new to this program? Well, let me show you the way. In fact, most people will charge you money for that. So, you know, just kind of be mindful and try to expand your mind and listen to everybody, even if it's like not your favorite, because you might learn something. So with all that stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about some of these questions that you want to ask yourself to kind of help you navigate through these programs that you're going to try. And like, I don't think that you should write these questions down. They're just things to keep in mind, because that would be so much work and so much stuff, you know, in order to figure out what it is that you're doing, unless if you're really interested in it. But let's go ahead and jump into this. So the number one thing is, what purpose do you want a digital audio workstation for? Are you making music? Are you doing it for sound design? Are you working with video? What is the purpose of you needing to work with audio? You're going to find that specific programs are going to cater towards, you know, specific things. For example, Bitwig is really good at tackling sound design in particular and experimentation with sound. It also does not have a video editor. Ableton does. So if that's something that's important to you, you probably wouldn't want to choose Bitwig. The second thing that's really important, at least for me, is, do you like the interface? One of the biggest reasons why I switched to Bitwig was because it had a nicer interface, in my opinion, versus Ableton. So do you like looking at the program? Like, this is your canvas, right? So is it something that's inspiring to you, or are you like, oh man, this looks like ugly as heck? Some programs offer different skins. Some offer like customizable things. Like you can do like some really cool customization in FL Studio. And then Ableton recently released some stuff that you can do with like custom colors for the layout. I just don't like the blocky Microsoft Excel spreadsheet look of Ableton personally. And it's not like hideous by any means, it's just not that inspiring to me. But there are things that you can do to kind of change that. So the third thing that we want to kind of look at is, how easy is it for you to know where you are? For example, are you going to know how to navigate from something like the clip launcher versus the timeline? Are those things easy for you to find? And can you kind of figure out where all that is? Even if you don't know where to go or whatever, it's really important to just kind of be like, all right, well, if I'm in here, this is what this function is. If I pull up this clip, now we're in clip mode, what does this mean? So you want to kind of familiarize yourself with these different things, because you're going to find that a lot of programs have the same kind of like quote unquote editors, albeit with some different functions. But if you can't figure out how to get out of this, or you don't even know what this is, then it's really easy for you to get overwhelmed and to get stuck. The fourth thing that we want to cover is, how easy is it to get sound to come out? Right? So some stuff like Cubase, in my experience, I think it was Cubase 7, I had to go through a lot of legwork just to figure out how to pull up a virtual instrument. On something like Bitwig, I just go to the plus and I go to instrument and I pull up anything and hit caps lock. And if I push a key, it works. Not every DAW is that simple, and sometimes you have to set things up to something like a MIDI channel, or just because you drag audio to the channel in itself or on a track or whatever, it might not always play, or you might run into roadblocks like that. So you want to kind of just be mindful about how much work you have to do in order for the thing to make sound in the first place. Don't worry, like, you know, you're not going to have access to all of these instruments and stuff that I have, but you should be able to navigate pretty easily of like where all that stuff is, right? Where's your sample library? What is a sample library? Where's all that other stuff? So the fifth thing is also important to consider, and that kind of gets into a little bit more equipment that you'll have to do some more research in, but are you using hardware / live instruments? Do you know how to set up recording for, you know, your guitar or for vocals or for your hardware synth? Those things become really important, especially like I'd say Reason has a lot of stuff that caters towards, you know, like all that kind of stuff with like really cool hardware integration integration. Bitwig says that it does. I don't really have a lot of experience with it, but you would want to know how easy it is to kind of integrate that, which goes into the sixth thing, which is how easy is it to set up MIDI keyboards. Now, something that you might not know is that every MIDI keyboard has a script, and not every DAW has a script for it. And what a script basically is integration within your MIDI keyboard. For example, if you have Ableton Push and you use it within Live, it's going to be fully integrated because those two things are made for each other, right? That's one of like the biggest selling points with Ableton. But if you try to use all the features within the Push with something like Bitwig or something like Logic, you're not going to be able to use any of that stuff. So you'll have to figure out how to set up, like, what is it called? Like MIDI control or a Mackie control. Same thing if you have like a machine, or if you have an MPC and you're trying to integrate that stuff. Like, that's one thing that you really want to consider with all that, because you might have hardware lying around that you want to try to use with your program. So the seventh thing is kind of redundant in the means of the third question, but how easy is it to browse, you know? A big reason why I like Bitwig so much is because everything is right here in front of me. Here are my effects, my instruments, and here is some other stuff that I have in order for organization purposes. And then if I go out of that, I have access to my entire sample library. And if I want to find something, I can just type in kick, and then all of everything within this thing, like, pulls up all my kicks. That's not that easy to find sometimes. The browser within Ableton is kind of archaic in some ways, and it's something that, like, you have to go and click on another folder in order to type in a search function, and that was really cumbersome for me. And along with that are, you know, do you know where your effects and where your mixer is? So right now you can't see my mixer, but if I kind of go over here to this little mix tab, you can see, you know, where all my inserts and effects are in that manner. And if you do any kind of mixing or mastering, you know, this will be an important thing for you, because you're going to want to be able to see all your levels and be able to see, you know, your latency, which you can see right here, and, you know, all those other things that get involved with that. The next question is, what is unique about the program? I kind of give you a very brief and arguably bad breakdown of some of the DAWs and some of their features from before, and I apologize for having a lack of experience with that. I didn't really do a lot of research into this just because I didn't think that it was that necessary. But what is unique about whatever it is that you're looking at, right? So we talked about Bitwig. It has a very modular approach, meaning that I can assign LFOs, I can assign envelopes, I can assign all these different modulators to anything that has a knob on here. And that means that in order to create cool random things or have these like crazy moving morphing sounds within my VSTs over time, I can create incredibly complex sounds with that. It also supports other cool things like a virtual modular field environment, called the grid. So if I go in here, you can pull this up, and if I double click on this, then I have access to, you know, start building like crazy complex patches within this. Reason has some stuff that's kind of like this, but it doesn't have the same interface. So it still supports like this cool like routing environment, but it looks like it's more like hardware as opposed to this like digital neon color scheme or layout or graphic user interface. Yeah. So the next question is super important. Does it support your plugins? If you already own a DAW and you've already purchased software, you really need to be careful and see if your program supports that. If you only own audio units, Bitwig does not support audio units. If you only own VST3, some programs do not support VST3. Well, I'd hope that now they'd be caught up, but back then some programs did not. You know, you don't want to lose all that stuff. For the most part, if you're on Mac, which isn't really a program thing anymore, but if you're on Mac and you're on Catalina, you can't use 32-bit programs or 32-bit plugins anymore. So, you know, that's really important to consider. And, you know, there are some restrictions or whatever within all that stuff. If you bought FL Studio and you're on a Mac, you can only use FL Studio plugins in FL Studio. So, you know, your Maximus, your Harmor and stuff will not transfer over to your new program. It seems obvious, but those are just things that you might find yourself being surprised about and might be really upset about, so it's important to consider. So the next one is, do you have friends that make music, and do they have interest in collaborations? Now, why is this important? Because you want to know what integration you have. So, you know, sometimes like a great way to learn your program is if one of your friends that you know are using it, for one. But the second thing is if you are able to share projects between people, or are you going to have to stem things out, and is that that's something that you are even interested in the first place. There's some really cool software that I never use called Ableton Live Link that some programs use, and you don't have to have Ableton for it. I don't really know how it works. There's also Rewire. You might want to see and check in to figure out if that kind of stuff is interesting to you and is going to be applicable as well. Or are you going to, instead of being able to bounce out your project, or sorry, send your project over to somebody else, bounce out stems? Okay, well, how do you do that? You know, those are things that you're going to have to figure out. So the last two things that I want to talk about are kind of, you know, superficial, but also very serious as well. And the first one is, what is the price? So I get a lot of questions about that stuff of like, yo, like Ableton is way cheaper than Bitwig because Bitwig offers a year subscription service and Ableton is, you know, this, and this. That's something that you'll kind of have to decide for yourself. So by default, Bitwig is $400, unless if you have some kind of student discount or whatever, and it offers a year of upgrades. And then after that, it's like $150 or so to purchase another year. If you purchase the suite of Ableton, it's like $7.99 or so, and eventually there will be some kind of crossover, right? So if Ableton doesn't upgrade itself or doesn't come out with a new Ableton, which you'll have to buy eventually for 5 years, how long would it take you to, you know, purchase the same amount in Bitwig? Or the other way to think about it is, even though Bitwig has that subscription model, it doesn't mean that you have to upgrade. If you are waiting for something cool to come out and Bitwig doesn't, for whatever reason, have anything that interests you, you can wait another year. You can wait 2 years and then upgrade later. If you buy FL Studio, they have a really cheap model that after you purchase it, you get free upgrades for life. But it doesn't come with all of the plugins unless if you spend like, I think it's like $1,000 for everything. Reaper is arguably the cheapest of all paid because you can literally get it for $60 and it has access to a bunch of really, you know, a wide variety of content. So, you know, if price is really like, you know, important to you, then you really want to kind of consider how much money you're willing to invest in a brand new skill or to change the way that you approach your skill that you might already be familiar with. And the last thing that is also a bit important, which you should hopefully be prepared for, is how much disk space does your factory content take? If you buy Ableton Live Suite, it's got like 50 gigs of content and you don't have to download it all because you get it as extensions from packs from ableton.com. But for some stuff, like I think for the most part, Bitwig is like around 4 gigs total of all the content, but that could be a lot, or that could be super detrimental to whatever hard disk space that you have. Hopefully you've got enough, or, you know, you might want to consider getting an external, all that stuff, but that's something that you want to figure out so that way you know that your program is going to work on your computer. I almost ran into a similar problem because I bought Complete Ultimate 10 and I ran out of disk space super fast. So I ended up having to uninstall a lot of stuff in order to be able to continue to like even just make projects on my computer. And so while I still have all that stuff from Complete 10, I have a ton of it uninstalled just because I don't have the disk space for it. And even as now, like I'm running really low on my 1 terabyte, you know, hard drive. That's a bunch of information. And I know that we talked a lot about this kind of stuff, but these are some things that you want to consider whenever you are shopping for your DAW. Just to kind of summarize things, you know, demo everything if you can, ask questions, watch YouTube videos. Don't ask yourself, you know, who uses this and who uses this, because that's not going to be helpful to you. And to be honest, like there are going to be some things that you're just going to have to accept in general, because like there's so many unknown unknowns that are going to be coming your way within music production, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but having a little bit of information under your belts whenever you're choosing a program might help you become more familiar and might help you kind of jump right in, as opposed to opening up the program, looking at a blank screen and not knowing what to do, because that's super counterintuitive, especially if you drop a bunch of money. If you buy a brand new PlayStation, you know that all you have to do is load up the disc and start the game. You might have to go through like, you know, some setup or whatever, right, to, you know, personalize your account or whatever. But imagine how much easier music would be if you had that kind of familiarity to this. And while you're not popping in discs and stuff, it's very synonymous with popping in a sample or popping in an instrument. And that's what you want to find. You want to find this efficiency within your workflow, and you want to find things that are going to encourage you to explore, as opposed to sit here and get stumped and then try to go and seek out the answers, which seeking out information is great, but the more that you spend getting frustrated, the less likely it is that you're going to want to spend time in the DAW, unless if you really just are like me and just will sit down and watch a 2-hour video on something until it's over, and sometimes watch it multiple times. That was a really long-winded explanation of this stuff. This was kind of just my thoughts on how you can approach these DAWs and all that. It is a pretty, like, it's not a serious serious topic by all means, but there's a lot of stuff that hopefully you will be able to think about and also be ready to learn before you make the jump into getting whatever it is that you want. This video was intended for people, for the most part, that have been considering switching, especially like those guys who asked me about switching from Ableton to Bitwig, and also for those people who are considering just getting into music and have never gone before. So with all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching my content. That's pretty much it, and feel free to ask me questions about whatever it is that you got, or to give me more information, or like, talk about your DAW if you want to, tell me why Cubase is great. Tell me why FL is great if you want to, because I don't know these things, and sometimes I would actually like to. I will see you all in the next video, which will be very soon, and don't forget to catch my live streams that are going to be throughout the week. I'll see you later.